Thank you, Mr. Vincenzo, for this informative speech. We are now to begin our first session of the day, entitled United Nations E-Government Survey Results, presented by Mr. Richard Kirby. Please welcome him to the stage.
Thank you very much. My presentation will be a complement to what Vincenzo just said on our e-government survey, and also talk more about open data and open government. Next slide. So we talked about the survey and the use of it. To me, the major issue is not just the ranking, but how government can use this survey to improve the lives of citizens. And this is where open government, open data plays a major role in it. Next slide. So when we look at the UN normally classifies countries in 4 stages. You have the emerging stage, the enhanced stage, transactional, and connected. And we see most of the Gulf countries are in that borderline transactional going towards connected. And that's a positive streak. In the world average, most countries are in between the enhanced and the transaction stage. So we see that there are a number of these services available in the countries, but there's clearly a need for a lot more, especially in terms of integrated services, open government, open data. We realize that there is a lot of work being done, and from my meeting in Oman last week, people are clamoring for a lot more services from the Gulf region. And I think the vision and leadership have respected that and are, in other words, are moving forward in order to do that. So we talked about the themes of the survey. I'm going to focus mainly on the open government data. So the open government data, we're looking at what? What are the national portals? What are they doing? How many GCC countries actually have an open data portal? And how are people using information to move forward? And can public propose new data sets? So data sets are always an issue. What are the best data sets? So in terms of open government, for the most part, the Europeans are ahead of the GCC when it comes to open government national portals. And we're looking at how governments are using the standards from W3C to ensure that you have a readable, machine-readable format that people can actually reuse and create new applications and new services. But for the most part, open data is still seen as a top-down approach, which means governments simply say, this is what I have, you have to accept it. And what we're saying is that there must be a way of developing these new practices to enable citizens to essentially ask, demand, request, whatever word you want to use, to have more information available online that's useful for them and not just useful for government. Okay? And the other thing we're looking at is that governments should encourage citizens to become more data entrepreneurs, which means that we want citizens to take a greater emphasis in developing these types of applications. So when we talk about the barriers that exist, these are the number one barriers that everyone tells me from this region why we don't have open data. So we're talking about confidentiality, fraud, lack of trust, data integrity, the power of data, which means that people prefer hoarding the information as opposed to sharing the information. There's no legislation. That's always a big one. We can't do it because there's no law allowing us to do it, which should be the reverse. You know, if there's no law, therefore you can do it. That's just my way of handling what laws and laws are not. And my ultimate favorite is, what is the person going to do with this data? What possibly can you guys do with our data that we cannot do for ourselves? And that's a very valid question. So when you ask that question, and then you become the student and your dad asks you, what did you learn in school today? And you say nothing, then the person can say, then why do you need the data? So whenever someone asks you, what are you going to do with this data? The correct response is, what do you have to hide? And if you ask that question, what do you have to hide? Then they should say, nothing. Then you say, then publish the data. So there's different ways of ensuring that data gets published. And essentially, if you look at any report, any government report that comes out, every single table out there is essentially open data. And the fact that you published it already clearly means that it's not confidential, and you there should put it in a readable format. So let's look at the usual benefits: transparency, accountability, trust in government, open government. But to me, the bottom five, or actually the bottom six, are important ones. What if scenarios? What if I do this to something? How am I using business intelligence to use that data, the big data, to actually help me develop better decision-making skills? How do I build scenarios from all the data I have available to me? What kind of applications can I design from this data? How do I use GIS to further enhance my application? And again, business intelligence, I want to focus on that out as well. So when I look at the UN government survey, we have 6 countries here. All right? And I label them A to F, so we keep the confidentiality of not releasing the data. All right? In essence, these are the countries: country A, country B, country C, country E, and country F. All right? So how are they ranking in e-government survey? So when we look at the graph, we see how the graph looks behind me. Next slide, please. So as you can see, the countries are basically next to each other. But if I'm the last one, which is in this case country C, and I've been the last for quite a while. You went too far. Back up. I've been a while. Back up, please. You're giving the answer to my answer here. I've been last since 2003. And now my minister looks at me as the chief information officer of my country and says, for the last 10 years, you've been last for 10 years. What are you going to do about it? And then I look at the UN government data, and I said, well, you know what? If we just increased every single year by 7%, next slide, we would be third. And I've been telling you for the last 10 years, this is how to improve our data, but you didn't listen. So what if analysis, you don't have to create anything special. You simply have a spreadsheet in front of you, and you determine what changes you can make to ensure you have the right ability. And that's the kind of what-if scenario is important when it comes to open data for the typical average person to use. Next slide. So let's look at the infrastructure data. Again, the exact same countries, A through F. They actually do exist, by the way. And when the survey does come out, I encourage you to find these countries out and determine why we're at this place today. So look at the infrastructure, and then when we look at the graph itself, we see there's a wide gap. Country F is actually way ahead. So now, my minister comes to me again and says, again, why are you at the bottom? And then you say to the minister, we had an infrastructure plan in place in 2010, but we delayed it for 3 or 4 years. So therefore, our infrastructure did not increase at all. So had you put the plan in place, the result would have been as follows. Next page. And you can see that you've jumped up. So these what-if scenarios enable anyone, any citizen, any academic, any person at all, to look at the raw data and determine where the country could be or should be based on actual data. And that's why decision-making is important. If you don't have the right data, how can you make decisions? Okay, again, our famous random countries out there. All these things can be changed extremely easily. Now I want to talk about examples of data set. Next slide, please. Next one. So if I look at open data sets, we have the usual real-time data, which is transportation, weather, stock market, etc. And then we have more static data: education, health, social services, housing, etc. Next slide. So I'm looking at myself, and I'm saying, what are some of the data set I want in education? So I want to find out what class size, how big the class size in a typical school is. Is there a strong math or science program? The physical size of the school, the percentage of students that go on to college from that high school, how high the national test scores are. Is there an arts program? Are there advanced placement programs in the school? Is there a big or small campus? What's the percentage of teachers with master's degree? Is there a diversity of student population? What are the results of international exams like the SAT or TOEFL? Now, are any of these data sets confidential? None of them are confidential. So they should be freely available. And then I said, what are my preferences? Well, I want a school with small classes, with a strong math and science program. Medium-sized school, I want a high percentage of these kids go on to college. I want advanced placement available. I want a diverse population, and I want good results in international exams. And then when I look at the map of Abu Dhabi, and I look at what my preferences are, next slide, I see where these schools are located. Now, the data is imagined, so please don't put it in the newspaper and say the high schools are here and the low schools are there, all right? So, as a parent, where do you want to have your kids go to school? We have two places. They're both high, one medium, one low. All right? And then I look at myself. I said, well, if my kid wants to go to school, I have to live nearby. So then I look at some housing data sets. Next slide. So I want to find out what the community size is, the average income of the neighborhood, diversity of the neighborhood, any kind of recreational, where are the parks located, where are the playgrounds, some good restaurants. Is it an older or younger neighborhood? What's the price of an average house there? What's the educational level of the neighborhood? The size of the house, how many bedrooms do I have? And the average household of the size. So is there 4 or 5 people living in a house at the same time? Again, none of this is confidential information. And all this can be made public. And I look at my preferences, and I want the average income to be $250,000, because I don't want to live in a poor neighborhood. I want to live in a silly, decent neighborhood here. I want a diverse neighborhood with multicultural, multi-ethnicity. I want the mean price of the house to be $750,000. So I want a big house. All right? I want highly educated people around me. So when I do my preference, I get this map of Abu Dhabi. Next slide, please. And then when I take my education and I take my housing means and I put them together, I get this option. So I put both my preferences together. Again, everything together. I look at the map, and now I see where I plan on living. Next slide, please. So now I have multiple choices. But essentially, I have 2 choices. One with a good school or a medium environment or housing, or one with a medium school and a high housing environment. So now I have a choice to make and a priority to make. What's the important thing? Good education or good neighborhood? And then I can make my choice. But I can't make any of that unless the data is available for us to use. Right? So there's no way in the world that any information I just gave you today should be considered confidential. Yet none of it is available in the vast majority of countries. When I buy a house in the United States, I get all this information handed to me ahead of time. I don't have to look for it. It tells me if I'm in a good or bad neighborhood. It tells me the average mean of prices of the house, the salary of the people, the genders, the diversity, and then I can make my own choices there. It's based on having the right data in place. And that's what we need to have in all countries. So let's look at some other data sets. We have health, employment, environment, agriculture, immigration, statistics, business. So if you're a business owner, I'm a small or medium enterprise, and I want to start fixing a cars. Would it be nice to have data of the last 10 years, what models of cars are being imported to UAE for the next 10 years? Then I can concentrate. Is Toyota the best way to go? Is it a Mercedes-Benz? Is it a Volvo? Is it whatever car manufactured? I can see the trend going up. And I can develop my own strategy to ensure that I meet that market. But if I don't have that information as a businessman, I'm basically working in the dark. And we don't want that. We want to have information available for people to use at any time they want to, and never be asked, what are you going to do with the data? Because there's always something to do with data. So here are some of the open government strategies that we looked at. Right? In access, engaging in policy, improving public services, co-creativity. So what kind of strategies do we need? First of all, we need to have an open data strategy in the countries. And we're working together with the UAE to develop these type of policies and strategies. Why do you need a strategy? You can simply say, put all the data online, close our eyes, and let nature take its work. And that might be a strategy, and it probably might work. Because giving people the opportunity, they normally succeed in. So, but we need to have strong cooperation among government agencies to share information back and forth. Now, Emirates ID has a wealth of information in that national ID card. How is it sharing that data with other ministries, other departments? You can ask that question to Dr. Curry later on to make sure he gives you the right answer. But if you're able to share that data, that's a wealth of information out there, because everything relies on that card. Right? You cannot get anything without having that card in place. So that card can gather a lot of information, a lot of data that can be reusable. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about developing open data applications, developing a business case should be the primary thing. Why are you doing these apps? Why are you doing anything if you cannot verify it and justify it by a return on investment? Why am I investing my time and effort if I have nothing in return? So develop that business case enables you to have the right strategy in place, the right elements in place, the right services in place to ensure you go forward. Next slide. Vincenzo showed you this graph. But what's missing here is in 2016 and 2018, the GCC will surpass Europe on their global average. Because the trends are clearly moving forward. And by 2018, I can almost guarantee you that the GCC would be the leading block of countries in the UN government survey. Next slide, please. So in our survey, what are the new elements we're looking at? For the first time, all survey data will be open. So now we are talking the talk and walking the walk. Before we told you, open data, open data, open data, and you kept saying, where's the survey, where's the survey, where's the survey? And we kept saying, well, we'll give it to you, but you can't use the data. Now you can use the data to do whatever you want with it. And we will not ask you, what are you going to do with the data? It's all yours, including formulas, so you can do your what-if analysis by changing anything on the data, and you get the results as well. Okay? We'll develop an e-government toolkit, which will enable all member states to develop their own surveys, using the e-government survey as a model. We have e-tools available on the survey's knowledge base, so you don't have to, you can actually go out there and do your own self-assessment by comparing UAE to France, or Bahrain to Burkina Faso. You can compare any country you want to and get the breakdown as well. We are now updating our survey through crowdsourcing, which we're asking people for their advice as opposed to having a limited number of people out there. Okay? We're receiving feedback from member states. We're listening. In the past, we kept saying we're listening, but we weren't listening. Now we're really listening. Right? And then we want to make sure that open government and citizen engagement will be strengthened in future surveys. And any country that's innovative will extremely be an asset for you in the e-government survey. So what is the UAE profile? So we're looking at implementation of the UAE Smart Government Strategy. We see that the vision leadership are moving forward in the UAE in the right direction. Right? We also see that either will play a leadership role in expanding the national ID card and developing more open data sets. We're also looking for greater emphasis of open government from EDA. Next slide. We're also looking for greater partnership with data entrepreneurs. The data entrepreneurs are the young men and women who are creating these apps for you. And they are not the enemy. They're not the crows and the owls. They're your friends. These are the guys and men and women who are going to develop these apps for you. The greater they're able to create apps, the better it is for you. So government should be more of a facilitator as opposed to I dictate things for you. Okay? And the other thing we're looking at is to continue staying active in social media, especially in the trends of the youth market. You have a very large youth population here, and the focus should be on social media and open government. Vincenzo's went through this before, but I'm going to focus on the partnership with the citizen developing data entrepreneurs. When you create your open data portal, make sure you develop the portal, enabling data entrepreneurs to use it properly. Simply putting Excel files on the portal and saying, I've got an open data portal is not enough. You need to work hand in hand with these young men and women, or older men and women, whoever the data entrepreneurs are. I don't want to age discriminate anyone here. But that's the key out there. Open the data, work with them, develop them, and they'll create applications for you that you never thought of. The last recommendation I'm going to focus is on the one on transformative. If you have the right data, you can make the right decisions. And leaders, decision makers who are extremely bright, those are the ones who will be innovative. They're the ones that's going to create the wave of change. And the only can do it is by having the right data and not be afraid to take risk. If you're not going to take risks, most likely you're going to be a mediocre decision maker and not care about having the right information. And we don't want that. We want decision makers to be innovative, risk takers, having the data involved, and thinking ahead, not 1 year ahead, but 5, 10 years ahead. And you can do that through using the information you have available with the right trends and decision-making tools available. So the concluding remark, I'm focusing on the last one, which is knowledge sharing. One of the big issues here we see is the lack of capacity in the public administration in a number of countries. So let's focus on developing that capacity to enable all civil servants to be able to be part of the process, to creating these data sets easily and useful for people to use. So we don't want to be owls or crows. You want to be able to say to the world, I am an innovator, and I have the tools to go forward, and I will go forward. And if the GC continues to go forward, there's no stopping you guys. Thank you very much for your time and effort, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Mr. Richard. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a 30 minutes coffee break. Our sessions will resume at 11 a.m. Thank you.